Hey, welcome to Therapy by Gabby. I'm Gabby. I'm a licensed professional counselor practicing in the state of Wisconsin, and I talk about things for therapists, therapy goers, and the mental health experience in general. Today, we're going to talk about why some therapists don't accept insurance in their practices. And this is a very controversial and sensitive topic for very good reasons, and so my only request is that any dialogues that are happening in the comment section that we keep it respectful, we meet each other with curiosity and perspective, and we don't attack one another. I've been a therapist for about 5 years now, and at this point in my life, I do own my own practice, and I am a therapist that does not take insurance. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I did post a video on TikTok sharing more about the personal reasons, and I will link that video in the description below if you're interested. For the sake of this video, I'm going to focus on just the general reasons why a lot of therapists don't want to work with insurance companies, and if you're interested about the personal reasons, you can check out the TikTok video. I want to be very clear in highlighting that as a therapist who does not take insurance in their practice, I know that I have a lot of privilege. And not only a lot of privilege in my position of being a therapist, but a lot of privilege coming from other identities I have, such as being a white, cis het, and mostly able-bodied person, etc. And while not taking insurance in my practice has minimized the possibility of experiencing burnout and making this a more sustainable career so that I can provide services to people, I do acknowledge that it does also limit accessibility to people who do not have financial means and who still need access to treatment and do deserve access to treatment. I want to make that very clear that I believe that everyone deserves access to healthcare, and also healthcare workers deserve an appropriate wage. The reality is that there are more therapists leaving this field than there are entering the field, and we have a high rate of burnout and turnover. And so a lot of therapists are finding ways to make doing therapy a sustainable career. And I know that while fixing one problem for the provider, it also adds to systemic issues in a lot of other ways. I don't claim to have the answers, and I don't claim to be an expert on this. There are ways that therapists can disrupt the system without taking insurance, such as reduced fees, pro bono work, pay what you can models, giving back to the community in other ways. It's still not as accessible as if we did take insurance, and at the same time, we're finding that middle ground of giving back while also making sure that we can take care of ourselves and sustain providing treatment. I am also not an expert in insurance. This information is coming from an overview of information that you can find online. It's also coming from my personal experience from colleagues that I'm friends with and colleagues that I've had conversations with. So if you hear anything that sounds like misinformation, absolutely, I invite you to correct me in the comments. I want to quickly preface that this is going to be more of like a conversation, chit-chat style video versus having a script and a linear, this is reason 1, 2, 3, why it's difficult to work with insurance. So it might seem like I'm jumping around a lot, but I feel like all of these issues intersect with one another, so I just want to put that out there. All right, but it's time to jump in. I think it's important to acknowledge a very common misconception, which is that all therapists can work with insurance. This is true for the most part, and there are also some other things to consider. One example of this is that it wasn't until, I think, end of 2023, beginning of 2024, that licensed professional counselors were allowed to be in network with Medicare. Up until that point, licensed professional counselors could not work with clients who had Medicare insurance unless those clients paid them out of pocket. And then a more common experience for therapists who do want to work with insurance is they will apply to credential with the insurance company and be in network. And after months of waiting to hear back from the insurance company will deny them for various reasons. Oftentimes what providers hear is that they already have too many providers in network and they do not need any more, which really doesn't make sense to me given that we have so many people who need mental health care and we have more therapists leaving the field than entering the field, but this is often what we hear. My understanding is that if you work for a group practice or agency that is well established or has a long-standing contract with an insurance company, that is typically easier to get in network with the insurance company because there's already that relationship there, versus if a therapist is going out on their own, starting a solo private practice, or just building their group practice, that is typically where insurance companies are more difficult to get in network with. Now, obviously, there are a ton of different insurance companies, and some of them are very easy to work with, very easy application process, whereas others are much more complicated, and some people can apply on their own and go through the whole credentialing process themselves, whereas a lot of therapists opt to pay somebody to credential with the insurance companies for them. And usually paying somebody to do this for you is a good chunk of money, not that they don't deserve it, but just that it's an extra expense that you have to consider in your budget when you are starting your practice. And so when I first started my practice and I was considering insurance, I did reach out to somebody who did this for therapists, and I believe I was quoted like a flat rate. And then I think it was something like $150 to $300 per insurance company that I wanted to credential with, if I'm remembering correctly. Again, this is just what I was quoted. I'm sure the rates to do this vary depending on like location, if you go through an agency, if you go through somebody who just does this through their own business. It's definitely something you want to do your own research on if you are going to consider that investment. This was just my experience, and I'm just highlighting the fact that it is an expense to consider. And if therapists do decide to move forward with credentialing with insurance companies, it can take months for them to hear back about their application. And then it can take months for them to be like officially in network with the insurance. So even if a therapist would like to be in network with an insurance right away to work with clients, they have to wait until they get that official okay. And so a lot of times when people decide to go into private practice, they start the credentialing process way before they even make the jump. And once a therapist is accepted in network with insurance companies, they can start to face a lot of other challenges. So for example, that can include low and inconsistent pay, it can include delayed payments, denied claims, a lot of unpaid labor trying to verify insurance benefits for clients, and fighting with insurance companies for them to cover services for clients who do need it and trying to justify medical necessity. And another huge risk for providers is the fear of clawbacks. Now, essentially what that means is at one point in time, an insurance company will cover services and say that, yes, this meets medical necessity and here's your payment for the time that you worked. And then months, years later down the road, that insurance company does an audit. They decide that those services were actually not medically necessary, and then they send you a letter or some sort of message saying, hey, this wasn't medically necessary and we are actually not going to cover those services, so now you owe us X amount of money back. And I have heard horror stories where therapists have had to pay back thousands and thousands of dollars. I've heard horror stories where the insurance company just pulls it right out of their bank account. Now, sometimes therapists can go through an appeal process where they are able to fight the insurance company and keep their wages, where other times therapists go through the appeal process and the insurance company says, nope, not medically necessary, you have to pay us this money back, you signed our contract, and so you have to abide by this contract. In some states, there are laws that protect providers from clawbacks after a certain amount of time, and I believe there are some states where there is no limit and insurance companies can claw back at any point. Now let's talk about low and inconsistent pay. On my TikTok video, someone commented saying, doesn't the insurance company reimburse you whatever your full rate is anyways? And I think that's an important thing to clarify. So if you don't already know this, when a provider decides to work with insurance, what happens is the insurance company gives them a contracted rate, meaning that the insurance company says, this is what we are willing to pay you. And usually it is much, much less than whatever the provider's rate is, as if somebody was paying them out of pocket. So for example, my rate could be like $150 and an insurance company might say, we will only contract with you if you are willing to be reimbursed $85. I don't know the exact reimbursement rates for all insurance companies, that's just an example. Now, what can be really frustrating about this is that the reimbursement rate varies widely from each insurance company and each provider that works with a single insurance company. I've heard of reimbursement rates as low as $40 a session to as high as like $250, almost $300 a session, and it really depends on each individual insurance company. And the thing is, in most insurance contracts, therapists have to agree to not disclose their contracted rate, meaning that they cannot talk about their contracted rate with other providers. Now, this obviously prevents pay transparency, and I'm not an expert in insurance, so I don't know the exact reason why they do this, but my assumption is that they want to pay providers as low as possible, and they know that there will be providers out there who will settle for lower rates. And again, this can depend on each insurance company. Some insurance companies have like a base of this is what we reimburse, this is the contracted rate that we give to most people within our network. And then there are other insurance companies that vary their reimbursement rate, and it seems like there's really no rhyme or reason for why they do this. So this could mean that a provider who spends thousands of dollars on like EMDR or brain spotting certification would get the same reimbursement rate as somebody who is maybe early on in their career and hasn't done any of those intensive trainings. Not that that person doesn't deserve an appropriate wage, just highlighting that there are a lot of people who invest a lot of money into furthering their education and specializing, and there often isn't any increase in wages for that. Now, providers can negotiate with insurance companies to raise their rates. I've heard some people say, nope, it doesn't happen, I get denied every time. I've heard other people say like, yep, they raised it and they raised it by this dollar amount and that's great for me. Again, I don't really know how they make those decisions, but it's another thing where technically providers can't discuss their contracted rate, and it prevents people from knowing how to negotiate. And something I've noticed, which I don't know if this is a fact or just from my personal experience, so if any therapists are watching this want to add to the conversation, what I've noticed is that it seems like group practices and agencies often get higher reimbursement rates than providers who are in solo private practice. I don't know if anyone else has had that observation, but that's what I've noticed. When I worked for a group practice and I could see what the reimbursement rates, even though I was only getting a percentage of what insurance reimbursed, I could see what the full reimbursement was, and it seemed to be much, much higher than what people would complain about in like Facebook groups, for example. Another challenge of working with insurance is it often takes a very long time to get paid. Again, this can depend insurance to insurance. I remember when I worked for the group practice, we tend to get reimbursed by insurance, I want to say 4 to 6 weeks after having a session is when I would typically see that pay come through. Now, depending on if any issues came up, it could take much, much, much longer, and sometimes never getting paid at all. And when insurance companies do delay that pay, if issues come up or there's a denial, that's where that unpaid labor comes in, where providers have to work with the insurance company for hours trying to figure out what went wrong, how do we resubmit the claim, why was the claim denied, how do we make this reimbursement come through, etc. And sometimes that is a lot of back and forth with insurance companies where they say, okay, talk to this person, they give you this number, you call that number, they say, hey, talk to this person. It can be a mess. Now, again, some insurance companies could be much, much easier to work with where it's not that big of a hassle, and some of them can be frustrating. And because of this, oftentimes providers will hire out somebody to bill insurance for them. And again, that's another expense to consider. Depending on who you have do this, again, if it's an agency or if it's someone who just runs their own business, it could be pretty pricey or reasonably priced. And again, they deserve that wage. It's just another thing that the therapist needs to consider when they think about how much do they need to make, how much do they need to budget in order to pay taxes and in order to maintain their business. Another challenge that comes from working with insurance is the limitations that insurance companies place on providers. So for example, the insurance company might limit the amount of sessions that a client can have, and they might say that it's not medically necessary after a certain amount of sessions. The insurance company might require certain treatment protocols. So for example, if they ever did an audit and they looked through a provider's notes, they would want to see certain modalities such as CBT or whatever they consider to be evidence-based. And any person who does use insurance to cover their mental health services, their provider will have to render a diagnosis, which will be in their medical record and be sent on every claim that goes to the insurance company, because again, this is what indicates to the insurance company that the therapist says this is medically necessary. And not everybody wants a diagnosis on their medical record. There are also some diagnoses that insurance companies will not cover mental health treatment for. And so that's something that would be important for a therapist to verify when they are verifying benefits. I want to be very clear that there are therapists who work with insurance companies and do so in a sustainable way and in a way that works for them. And I am pro therapist doing whatever works for them and whatever creates a sustainable career. And what can happen for some therapists that take insurance is that because of the low and inconsistent pay, they often take on a much higher caseload, meaning that they work with more clients per week, so they have more billable hours. Because therapists don't get paid for any time that they work that they don't see clients. And sometimes this can result in low quality, ineffective treatment because therapists are so burnt out. So overall, accepting insurance can absolutely make therapy more accessible. And at the same time, for therapists, it can lead to a very quick trip to burnout and providing ineffective treatment, which can make us feeling absolutely horrible and like a failure and wondering if we even want to be in the field at all. And so because of these challenges and because of the risks of potentially inconsistent and very low pay and possibly clawbacks and a lot of unpaid labor, this is why some therapists will opt to not work with insurance and only accept cash pay in their private practice. If you like this video and you want to see more of my content, you can check me out on TikTok, and that is at Therapy by Gabby. It's the same as my YouTube channel name. I post more consistently over there. And if you want to see more long-form content on my YouTube, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn on the notifications so that you can be notified every time I post a video. And let me know if you have any video suggestions in the comments. It really helps me out, and I appreciate you being here. Hopefully I'll see you at the next one. Bye!